pioneers. Almost every single one of you will be remembered throughout history.
You're not mad, right? I'm just taking this?
Yeah, no, we're cool. You shouldn't have to take the risk.
Mickey 17. Bong Joon-ho just comes slithering, just slinking, just creeping out of the shadows to bring us another banger. Like, oh my freak. He won a bunch of Oscars, now he's just ready and willing to take on some sloppy seconds to get some more Oscars. Coming back with yet another great film. Now let's get down and dirty here, starting with the emotional impact of the film. It was kind of heartwarming and pretty adorable at times. But then other times it was sadistic, cynical, and had humor that for a lot of people might be crossing the line. The way the adorableness meshes with the sadistic nature creates kind of a bipolar atmosphere that makes all of the jokes just a lot more funnier. They weren't ever the type of jokes where you do one of those belly laughs like a ho 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 type of thing. It was more like the type of jokes where you're snickering to yourself going like, what the f was even that? Like, it was some pretty random stuff. A good example would be that Kenneth Marshall's wife is only ever talking about sauce and different ingredients that she can use to make sauce. She's only ever talking about sauce, which is so random and strange, but I just love it. Nothing in this movie ever moved me to tears, but I don't think that's what they were really going for, and it was still pretty solid. I do wish some of the main themes went a little bit deeper though, especially since this is a very complex world. You would expect something a bit deeper than something like, don't judge a book by its cover, at least that's what I got from it. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's just the surface level main underlying theme that I got. Probably the best part of this movie were the characters. Robert Pattinson portrayed his character incredibly well. What kicks this story into gear is when Mickey 17 is perceived to be dead by the corporation, and so they go ahead and create Mickey 18. Mickey 17 ends up making it back to his room and finds Mickey 18. The interesting part about this is that their personalities are quite a bit different because I guess the cloning machine that they use isn't quite 100% perfect. So every time a new copy is generated, their personalities are slightly different each time. This really makes the story a lot more compelling since Mickey 17 is kind of a wimpy pushover and Mickey 18 is just wants to kill everybody. He's kind of a psychopath. Seeing Robert Pattinson take on two of these roles is so entertaining because of how different they are. Mickey may be the most interesting character, but I think that Kenneth Marshall takes the cake for being the most absurdly hilarious. It's just because he's so idiotic and goofy, it's kind of hard not to laugh whenever he speaks. I don't know what direction Mark Ruffalo was given for this character, but he'll most likely remind you of one very orange man. I mean, there might be a lot of people out there that hate this movie just because of the somewhat resemblance towards Trump. But you know what? People make fun of Trump all the time, mainly because he makes it so easy to get made fun of. But I mean, he wasn't exactly like Trump. He was definitely way more over the top and exaggerated, but I can still see a lot of people getting mad about it. He's the type of antagonist who's not supposed to seem very threatening. The only reason he was somewhat threatening is because of how much authority he has on the spaceship. But it's not even really him making all the threatening decisions though. It's mainly his wife, whispering little things into his ear that he just blindly follows. Which makes the true threat in this film his wife, which is actually brilliant storytelling, especially for a comedy. Speaking of Marshall's wife, I actually don't know what her name is, I can't really remember, but if I were to give one word to describe her, it would be saucy. She is one saucy mama jama. She also never stops talking about sauce, which is like the running joke of the entire film. It never explains the lore behind why she likes sauce so much, but maybe it's a rich thing, I don't know. But what I do know is that it's just freaking funny, man. She's played by Toni Collette, and this is a really perfect role for her. It's very similar to her role in Knives Out, which she did great in as well. Yeah, she is definitely the real villainous mastermind behind this, since she's doing these little whisper sessions into Kenneth Marshall's ear, and he just follows everything she says because he's dumb. He's just an idiot. I mean, she is meant to be portrayed a lot smarter than he is. As for Nasha, she's a really important character during the second and third act of the film. She acts kind of like a middleman between Mickey 17 and Mickey 18 to make sure they cooperate with each other, and to either reinforce them when she needs to or to stop them from doing something stupid. She has a really good and clear purpose, but beyond that, she's not a very interesting character. At least to me. One small complaint I do have about the characters is that during the first act and a little bit of the second act, it's kind of hard to establish which characters are actually going to be important. At the beginning, we're introduced to Timo, who's Mickey's only friend. And he didn't have a super huge role in the movie, which I thought was fine and necessary. But when we get introduced to Gemma, we're led to believe that she's a lot more important than she actually is. She's the one that brings Mickey in after he signs up to be an expendable. And there's a scene where she's explaining everything and all he can think about is her hair, how it smells, and how beautiful she is and all this stuff. But then she only has like one scene in the movie and then she's forgot about forever. Another one that was pretty underutilized was Kai. She plays a somewhat important role around the middle of the movie for a few scenes. Then she loses all her importance during the climax. I do understand that there's a lot of characters here and you can't really give everyone a spotlight, but it kind of just felt like they were set up to be more important than they actually were. Now, for the overall plot and the story, I think that they did a really good job at just setting up the world. A lot of people thought that the first act of the film was a little too long and dragged out, and it kind of was, but I didn't think of that as a major problem. Yes, it does take a bit longer to get to the real meat of the film, but it kind of has to be when it's a one-off sci-fi world that no one really knows about. I mean, they did have to make sure that we understood the rules of their reality before jumping into the actual story. Even with the first act being a bit longer, I was never bored and it kept me engaged the entire time. However, I completely understand why people wouldn't feel the same way. I mean, that first act is pretty dang long. It was probably a little too long, but I just didn't mind it. The second act, I believe, has the most entertaining and most fulfilled parts in it, as it should. Because now the story is really starting to happen. It's really starting to take place here. And it's also where you get more introduced to Kenneth Marshall, and he is probably the most entertaining part of this movie. Don't worry, I won't go into major spoilers here, but man, there's a lot that happens here. I mean, as it should. The second act should be the longest part of the film anyway. The third act does give us very clear and understandable resolutions to all the conflicts that took place. There is a good amount of side plots that start to formulate around the second act, and they're all taken care of early on into the third act to make room for the main and most important conflict. And I really appreciated this a lot because some movies just don't tie up their loose ends fast enough and it gets kind of chaotic and messy towards the end. Bong Joon-ho does a great job of just nipping those in the bud before it gets too crazy, and that's just good storytelling. I did think the dialogue was smart, witty, and exactly what Bong Joon-ho was trying to capture. The humor has a very nihilistic, dark tone to it. And to be honest, it was quite refreshing. We live in a world now where I feel like I'm walking on eggshells whenever I'm talking to someone I don't know just because I don't want to offend them or something. This film has opinions and it's not afraid to show it. I'm not gonna lie, people are gonna get triggered by this movie, but that might just be what people need right now. Filmmaking is an art form and a good movie shouldn't have to be censored because of jokes that might offend people. This film does not hold back and it just felt very pleasant to me. However, some of the dialogue and the jokes didn't quite land the way I was expecting, and sometimes they had dialogue in places where it felt a little unnecessary. Okay, this one's going to be a little bit quick because it's already as good as it could get. The cinematography, the visuals, and the CGI are incredible. Impeccable. This is the perfect example of how to properly use CGI. They used it enough to make those creeper things look very real and not enough to where it looks less real. Do you get what I'm saying? Kind of like some things out there. I mean, it's not as beautiful as something like Blade Runner 2049, but that's just because it's a different type of film with different types of objectives in mind. Overall, this is a high quality dark comedy film that is definitely worth the watch in theaters and on streaming. If you're a cynical emo kid that just needs a good chuckle, then you should go watch this movie before you do anything that you'll regret. I've sought my thoughts, and if you want to see a theory I made on the monkey, then you should click right here, and I'll see you on the other side.